guys, welcome to Bourbon and Breaches. Happy Friday. Today, I got a really special guest on, Roger Grimes. He is the author of over 13 books, over 1,100 articles on security. He's been in security over 30 years. Roger, I'll let you introduce yourself further.
Sure. Roger Grimes, data-driven defense evangelist of know before, really just been doing cybersecurity for 34 years, earned all of these great hairs. And I've done everything from, teaching computers, and I was a PC network technician, network manager, VP of IT, and then eventually just started, decades of computer security consulting, helping involved in a lot of incident responses, people broken into by all kinds of hackers, and also just doing, security reviews and that sort of stuff. So I feel like I haven't done it all, but I've done a lot. I was even a professional penetration tester for 20 years, and I broke into every place I was hired to break into in an hour or less, except for one place that took me 3 hours because the second time I was back there. And I'm not an uber hacker. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm maybe a 5 or a 6 for hacking. It's just not that hard once you know what you're doing. But for defending, I think I'm the best guy in the world. I think I'm the guy you want in your room if you're trying to defend yourself. So that's me in a nutshell.
Ah, that's cool. Absolutely. And I think on LinkedIn, you've got yourself as a data-driven
defense evangelist.
Defensive analyst. Yeah, or evangelist.
Mm-hmm.
What's that title?
Well, I wrote out of the 13 books, I wrote one called Data-Driven Computer Defense, and it just talks about how to really see how to really do a good computer security defense. 99% of all companies are doing cybersecurity defense really horribly. There's 2 or 3 things that account for almost all the hacking in the world, and yet the average organization doesn't spend 5% of their money to fight it. There is this huge misalignment between how we're successfully attacked, how we defend, and that misalignment, this long-term, never-ending misalignment, is why we're so susceptible to hacking and malware. And so I've kind of dedicated my career to trying to fight that and get people to better defend themselves.
That's awesome. Awesome. So a little different today. We're not going to do bourbon. We're going to do beer. Roger likes beer. So tell me what you're drinking, Roger, first of all.
Yeah, got so Arrogant Bastard Ale. I drink beer like people drink wine, and that I really like to drink all types of different beers, and I love to go to places and experience different things. But when someone says, like, what type of beer do you like? Really, Arrogant Bastard Ale is the one that I love. Stone Mountain Brewery. I think you were telling me, Rusty, that they recently got bought out. I didn't know that. I hope it doesn't spoil the beer. But the funny part is when I first bought my first Arrogant Bastard Ale, I bought it for my brother-in-law just to harass him and go, hey, here's a beer I found for you, because he's a little bit arrogant like I am. And I said, here, and it's got a funny saying on the back, and it just turned out that when I tasted the beer, I went, oh my God, that's Nirvana. And
Right.
if I take a taste of it, my body goes, I like that. That's my favorite.
That's what, yeah, exactly. So I have a funny story real quick. I bought my wife a bottle of wine, and it was called The Third Wife. I won't go into any further explanations on that one, but I think
I always tell my wife she's the best wife.
The third and best. That's awesome. So yeah, Stone was bought by Sapporo, so Japanese, and a lot of people may not know this, but Maker's Mark, which bought Jim Beam, was bought by a Japanese distillery. So Jim Beam, Makers 46, all those.
Overall, I'm not thrilled about any merger or consolidation ever, but you hope at least if you're going to buy it, at least keep the traditional recipes and brewing process and distilling processes. So we're at least getting the same thing we're used to getting.
Yeah, 100%. So what I'm drinking today is, if we can see it through this fake background, I'm drinking a Backwoods Bastard. So not Arrogant Bastard, but a Backwoods Bastard. It looks like a Popcorn Sutton if you've ever watched Moonshiners. But it is a Scottish ale aged in oak barrels, and it's super dark. I was telling Roger, I think this beer is probably at least 6 years old. It's been in my refrigerator. I got 2 or 3 of them, but it's fantastic beer. It's really rich, pretty boozy too. It's over 10%. So I'll have to take it easy until we get done here before
That's almost wine.
Oh yeah. So awesome. So a couple weeks ago, I was talking to Ali Awan from Beyond Identity, and we were talking about MFA and the shortcomings and how they're kind of trying to address it with basically passwordless security, et cetera. So I wanted to ask you, try to expand on that. What are how do you hack MFA? I mean, people think they buy MFA and it's a be all end all. What are some of the ways that you're seeing it come up deficient, I guess?
Yeah, it's, probably the biggest. I love MFA. Everybody should use phishing resistant MFA whenever possible to protect valuable data in systems. Problem is, you have a whole lot of people saying that MFA stops 99% of attacks. And let me tell you, MFA does not stop 99% of attacks. It's actually 95% of it is as easy to bypass and hack as your password. And things like, 20 to 40% of all attacks involve unpatched software, and MFA is not stopping any of those attacks. So I get mad when people say that MFA stops 99% of attacks. It doesn't, it never will. It does stop a lot of attacks, and that's a good thing. But probably the most common one, when I always tell people you should use phishing resistant MFA. And let me say, most of it isn't. Beyond Identity, just on a related note, is phishing resistant, but 95% MFA is easily phishable, just as if I was trying to steal your path. The whole reason we're moving from passwords to MFA is that supposedly, people steal too many passwords. Well, I can steal your MFA credentials or bypass them just as easily as a phishing email that asks for your password. So the most common phishing scenario, the one, when I say use phishing resistant MFA, there's 50 ways to hack MFA. I can hack any MFA solution at least a couple different ways, if not 10 different ways. But the one that bothers me the most, the one that I think that if this applies to your MFA, and it applies to the most popular MFA, you shouldn't use it. If you can get away with not using it, you certainly shouldn't buy it. But is that the attacker sends the MFA person a phishing email that looks like it's coming from the legitimate service, Microsoft, Google, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. But the link in it is a phishing link, a rogue URL that looks like the real URL. But if the victim gets tricked into clicking on the link, it actually takes them to what's called a man-in-the-middle website, transparent proxy, and then kind of takes them to the real website. But so now there's this man-in-the-middle website in between the victim and the real website, and everything the victim types in. So login name, password, MFA credentials. So anything that gives you one-time password, anything that gives you one-time password, the little numbers, phishable. Anything that the website sends back to the victim can be captured, including what's called the logon access control token. In a browser, it's a cookie. It's just a text file that has kind of a bunch of little numbers, hexadecimal numbers that identify you for the session. But the attacker can capture that, then disconnect your session, and then log on as you, change your password, and take control of the account. And many, many times you never get it back. So the number one way that MFA can be bypassed is through what's called a man-in-the-middle attack. And if your MFA solution can be bypassed or hacked using a man-in-the-middle trick, you shouldn't use it. And unfortunately, and let me say, it's not just me saying this, US government has said this. US government has said since 2017, you should not use any MFA that's tied to your phone number, like SMS-based MFA. You should not use any MFA that uses a one-time password, Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, push-based authentication. That's another one where when I wrote a book for Wiley a couple of years ago called Hacking Multi-Factor Authentication. And in it, I actually say, oh, I like push-based authentication. And that's when, you get this push message to your phone. It's like, is this you logging on in? I'm like, hey, I like it. It's pretty good. It tells you what location you're coming from and, what your operating system is. So you get these details. You go, oh, yeah, it is me logging in. But it turns out about 30% of users will say yes to it, even when they're not logging in.
Yeah. Well, I get it all the time. I get them from Google, right? If I log into another device, or YouTube TV when my daughter logs in or something, and says, oh, a new device. And I look at it, obviously. Now, if someone were phishing me from, say, the town she lives in, then I'd probably fall for it because I'm like, oh, she got a new TV, whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the problem is that I was even on like a large ransomware investigation where $20 million was stolen, and the that we found out that the CIO is the one that approved, CISO approved all the prompts, over 80 of them, and the origination location said Russia. And we said to them, why did you approve 80 prompts from Russia? And they went, listen, I was just told if I got this prompt to say yes. Well,
so
yeah. Well, you know what? Yeah, what I can see is that IT is trying to get the entire organization to go from passwords to push-based MFA. And they're like, oh, this is how it works. If you get a prompt, say yes.
Yeah.
And they either assume that anybody would know. If it's not you, click on no and then call the help desk, right, to
Figure it
start a
out.
security
Yeah.
incident response. But, or it was said and the person just didn't hear it. But either way, unfortunately, humans will, waylay the best planned security stuff. And even like I had another friend that he was in charge of oil rig people, and they actually had to buy smartphones for some of them because a lot of them had flip phones, but they got them smartphones, taught them how to use it, push-based authentication. And they found out that this one guy was approving all the prompts for all of his employees. And that's because they didn't want to be slowed down or whatever. And so he had them get all of their push-based MFA phone numbers pushed to his phone. So he's just all day long approving prompts, easy.
He has
for
no idea. He's completely circumventing the whole reason.
Yeah. So he gets in trouble and they say, don't do this. You're circumventing the whole reason we're doing this. 2 months later, they checked again and he'd enabled it all back to his phone. And he's like, listen, we're just trying to get our work done and y'all are getting in our way. And that is a capsulation of how a lot of end users feel about us, that we're,
that goes back to the old, the whole thing around security, right? You have to work with the business and enable them, because if you're prohibiting them, they're going to find a way around it, just like that. A great example. I can't, CISO doing that though is like, that's what I call a resume generating event.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem is most people, even if they're involved in a hacking event, cause the hacking event, almost no one ever gets fired. I mean, it does happen if it gets really big in the news or something.
Yeah.
But most people are like, well, it's the hacker that did it. And, or even like there's a famous saying, Bruce Schneier, who's a mentor of mine, someone was complaining about how come users don't care about passwords and keeping their passwords secret and stuff. He says they appropriately have looked at the risk for themselves. If their password gets compromised, they're never fired. He said, it's you, the security professional, that doesn't understand the appropriate risk. He said, if sharing their passwords or giving out their passwords actually resulted in them being fired, they would actually protect them more.
Yeah. I used to work for a company or a large city, probably figure it out if you look at my resume, but we hired some third party to come in and pen test us and try to get in, So we sat down with them in a room and we're going to go through stuff. And he goes, well, I've already looked at a couple things. And he looked at our website and he got into an account within 2 minutes. And turns out someone who was in charge of writing the website had their password reset, and whoever changed it didn't check the box to say user must change it. So his password was password 1. So within 2 minutes, he's got the login for the web admin, and it was embarrassing to say the least. But we talked about this. What is it? 4 things, really. I mean, social engineering. End users are at the center of almost all those things.
Yeah. Social engineering is involved in 70 to 90% of attacks and have been since the beginning of computers. Unpatched software is involved in about 20 to 40%. And then password issues are, and let me say the third thing has changed over time. Like when I started back in 1987, I used to tell people, make sure you pop your floppy disk out of your floppy disk drive so you don't get a DOS boot virus, right? That was the problem in the late 80s. And then it went to email worms and don't click on file attachments, and then be careful about what links. And now it's password issues. And password issues are involved somewhere between 15, 25% of the causes. And that's why MFA is a good thing. The problem is to implement good MFA, non-phishable, phishing resistant MFA, is really not that any harder than implementing the really easily phishable stuff. And unfortunately, everybody's implementing the easily phishable stuff. And they get told, like when I go to webinars and I show people how easy it is to bypass and hack MFA, everybody's mouth is dropped, because like when the world tells you that MFA, that 99% of attacks can be stopped by MFA, and it's a lie, or they don't know that they're telling you a lie, when that person gets hacked, they all of a sudden don't trust you. And I worked for Microsoft for a lot of years, and I was implementing MFA and the most advanced security things. And we were doing all this stuff and spending millions of dollars to secure all these companies. And I noticed all of them were being hacked still, even after the implementation of advanced security systems and, all kinds of devices and routers and firewalls and intrusion detection systems. How are they being hacked? Social engineering and unpatched software, like always. And that's part of the problem is that, imagine social engineering involves 70, 90% of attacks, and companies spend not even 3% of their money to fight it. No wonder it's being used by hackers and malware so successfully, because we're literally just not aligning our defenses against the primary. And we all know that social engineering is number one, but the average organization doesn't train their employees but once a year about social engineering. It's just a bizarre set of don't understand why it is the way that it is.
Well, I think the breach I talked about with Cisco, it happened about 3 months ago. They released the details of it, and they got someone's Google account, which was able to get the Cisco passwords because of password sync, but ultimately they had to defeat MFA to get into the VPN and actually be in the network. And they used social engineering. They apparently called the guy or gal, I don't think they identified who it was, and they peppered him with different accents and different questions and different companies until they finally just like, here's the MFA code.
Yeah, it sounded like push-based authentication, so he's got to approve it, and he wasn't approving it. So they called him and said, hey, this is like an IT, reading between the lines, this is an IT thing we're trying to do.
Oh, yeah.
You need to approve this so we can implement this thing. And he did.
We're investigating your account as being hacked, and we need you to approve this to further our investigation. Who knows what they said, but I mean, it's so easy to do because I think, end users that aren't particularly tech savvy, I'd say, it's overload on them a lot of times. They don't know what you're talking about. And then they're like, I don't know what to push. And then they freak out and just push it. So I think you're right. So on that same note, so MFA, how do you make it secure? What do you suggest people that have bought an MFA solution, that like you said, a lot of them buy it and they don't implement it correctly. What do they do to make it right?
So first of all, if you have a chance to choose your MFA solution, choose something phishing resistant. I literally have a list of, I call known good MFA that I update on the internet, on LinkedIn, that has a list of all the MFA that I like that is phishing resistant. But your question specifically, what do you do if you've got whatever you've got? You need to educate everybody involved about this is how this MFA works. And this is what it helps stop. This is what it can't stop. And here's the most important piece. Here are the common types of attacks against this sort of MFA that we're using. This is how to recognize those types of attacks, and this is how you should respond. So literally, like when we give people passwords, we're like, hey, your password has to be long and complex, and you shouldn't share it on other websites. Like we literally give people, so everybody in the world knows that their password, this is what we should do, this is how we should protect, even if they don't do it. But with MFA, we spend all this effort to tell people how to use it, and then we don't educate them about the types of common attacks. That would help. Educate your end users when they're using a particular type of MFA. Here's the sort of attacks you might see. Here's how to recognize them. And if you see them, report it to the help desk. That small bit of education would go a long way to putting down MFA bypass and hacking attacks. Gotcha.
Well, I mean, and to plug, you worked for KnowBe4. That's what you guys do, right? So you train users on what they should and shouldn't do, and try to mitigate those risks from the biggest risk factor there is end users, right?
Yeah, a lot of people are like, oh, well, Roger's saying this sort of stuff because he works for KnowBe4, and we do security awareness training, and we try to fight phishing. No, I work for KnowBe4 because when I worked at Microsoft, I started to realize that despite the best, most advanced defenses, all of my customers were still being hacked through social engineering and unpatched software. And I intentionally picked KnowBe4 as where I got depressed. I mean, the last 2 years of my life at Microsoft, if you were to talk to my wife, she'd tell you I sat in a chair depressed. I'm like, I don't think I'm helping my customers as much as I think I am. I got promoted. I was getting lots of money, and people were always saying, great, I did it, the projects on time and within budget, but they would all still get hacked.
Yeah.
And I suddenly realized they're all getting hacked basically 2 different ways. And now I'd say 3 different ways, but, social, like, how did they get the passwords? Social engineering, that or unpatched software. And I'm like, I literally got depressed, and I said, you know what? I told my wife, I'm going to quit Microsoft, and I'm going to go work for KnowBe4. And that's what I did. So I'm here. I'm saying this not because I work for KnowBe4, but literally, you could take me out of the equation. Social engineering and unpatched software have been the number 2 causes for hacking since the beginning of computers, and it's probably going to continue that way.
Sure. Easiest path of least resistance, right? Well, cool. Hey, thanks, Roger. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate your knowledge. Cheers to you, my friend.
Cheers.
Enjoy your arrogant bastard. I will enjoy my backwoods bastard. And have a good day. Thanks,
can't
everyone.
wait. I hope to meet you in real life one day. I'll bring a beer. You can bring a whiskey.
Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, absolutely. Next time I'm in Tampa, I'll let you know.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody, and good luck.
Thanks.
Continue to fight the good fight.
Thanks.